to the Boca Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and it's good to have you here. Happens to be a Friday. Also happens to be sunny where I live. I live in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area. We had some kind of weird weather this week, but it is stunning out today, even slightly cooler than normal. So that's been nice too. I hope you're enjoying your Friday where you're at. We've got a brand new guest for you today, and I'm going to introduce you here in just a second, but just a couple of things to keep in mind. If you're listening to the audio version of this after the fact, make sure that you follow us at youtube.com/Boca Podcast. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep up with the live streams. You can come hang out with us, ask questions of the guest while we're live streaming, and ultimately join the conversation. And this is really what the show is about. It's about conversation. We'd love for you to come hang out with us. If you are watching live today, do the same thing. Ask questions, comment. You can send us funny emojis if you want to. I don't care. Just engage. Let's have a conversation together. And then for those of you who are normally listening to the audio broadcast, also follow us over at Instagram. I mentioned YouTube, and you can subscribe to notifications there, but follow us on Instagram.com/Boca Podcast. We also announce the live streams there on our Instagram account. Then one other note before I introduce our guest today, as I promised I would do before every show, I made a small donation today to charitywater.org. Now, this is the organization, and I've just popped the receipt up there on the screen for today, but this is the organization that I give to on a regular basis, and I ultimately lead with this because I want to continue to encourage all of our listeners and our community at large to look for opportunities to give back, whether in your local community or to national or international organizations. Even just a small bit of money can go a really, really long way. And so I encourage you to do that. Do that with me, and let's make a difference in that way. All right. Enough of the intro monologue. I want to bring my new guest in today, Christora. Christora, is it Osters or Osters? I want to make sure I'm saying that right.
It's Osters.
Okay.
It's definitely Osters. We get oysters. We get all kinds of.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I have a name that, I mean, phonetically is actually not difficult to pronounce, but it's been mangled quite a bit over the years. So I feel your pain a bit. But simultaneously, I also want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So, all right. So Christora Osters is here with me today. And Christora and I are going to actually get into, in fact, Christora, I was just talking to my daughter a few minutes ago. I was like, I'm looking forward to this podcast episode today because we cover a lot of topics, very specific topics. I mean, over 500 episodes. So we jump around quite a bit. But I like just the simple notion of talking about how to get a photography business started. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges that you faced doing so, and ultimately how you learned to overcome those or are overcoming those challenges as a photography business owner. And we're going to get to that here in just a little bit. I want to start off the podcast episode with a question I ask most of my guests, which has to do with brand position. This is a great way for you to introduce yourself too. So tell me what market you're based in, and then ultimately what your photography business's brand position is.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I am just thrilled to be here and to help other people. It's kind of what we're here for, right? That's
100%.
the whole point in life. Help each other out. So I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky. I say we because I now have a studio of 8 different photographers, but we run a photography business that is all about the candid moments and what matters to our couples. So we base our timeless, elegant photographs on what makes our couples tick. It's how we actually get the uniqueness across in each of our sessions and in each of our weddings. And one of the things I consistently hear when I'm going through the booking process or when I'm interviewing a client, because really it's not just that they're interviewing you, you need to interview them as well. That's something that I think a lot of people don't think about. However, when I'm interviewing them, I want to make sure that they understand that there is no set pose that's going to be perfect for each individual couple. It really varies based on who you are as a couple. Okay. So that's where we've established our brand position, is that we want to know who the couple is in general and also who they are as individuals, and then bring that into our photography. So it becomes more authentic that way.
Sure. Now, this is interesting. I mean, first of all, a lot of photographers talk about playing to customers' preferences, but I don't know that I've quite ever heard a photographer talk about posing specifically based on the couple's preferences or their personality. What does that look like? How do you establish that? And just on a very tangible level, what does that look like when you're actually photographing your clients?
So, one of the things that most photographers don't think about is that trust is something that's earned. It's not something that automatically comes. So, I want to build that trust from the first interaction, whether it be when somebody gets onto my website or when I'm having a conversation with them. And what that comes down to is that human connection, is understanding that every story is uniquely theirs. I'm sure that you've seen this before, Nathan, where a couple will get onto a call and be like, we met on Tinder. Like they're almost like embarrassed about it. But that's part of their story.
Yeah.
Like that's part of your story. That's something that you should be proud of, that you utilized the technology that was there. So when it comes to the posing though, what I want to know is I want to know, do you trust one another? Does he protect you? Are you a person who wants to be an individual and be out on your own and courageous? That's going to dictate more for me what kind of positions I want to get you into. Are you a couple who can sit together in silence? Are you a couple who needs to be constantly in conversation? Those are the aspects that, and again, I really do the work to try and get to know my couples ahead of time, just so that they feel authentically seen, not just on their wedding day, but in general.
Okay, so I want to keep pushing on this one just a little bit more
Sure.
because there's some of what you're saying that sounds very familiar. I've heard photographers say this, but I am taken by your approach to this and that you're actually posing your clients differently based on their personality. So
I do.
what kind of questions, there are a lot of questions that many, if not most photographers will ask leading up to a wedding, right? Just as a means to quote unquote, get to
Sure.
know the couple or the clients. But what do you ask that enables you to figure out how to pose them? What does that specifically look like?
Sure. So when I'm going through and I'm actually interviewing my clients, I'm asking them questions like, what was the moment in your life when you knew that you were in love with this person? And what they say, you have to be able to read into it psychologically to understand what they're actually meaning behind it. For example, if I had a couple last night who they were interviewing me for if they wanted to book with me or not. And one of the answers that they gave for what's the moment in the wedding that you are most excited for is that they're excited for the party. That doesn't mean that they're excited to drink. It means that they're excited to be around the people that are not always around them. And so incorporating those aspects into a wedding day are going to be really influential and essential for them to really feel like they have gotten the most, not just out of photography, but out of the experience. And so when you listen to somebody, there's a difference, right? There's a difference between hearing what somebody says and really actively listening. So active listening is where you take what they say. I take notes like crazy because I want to go back in and actually figure out what is behind this. Like, for example, if one of my clients comes in and she says, I just never thought that I was going to get married. Well, what does that mean? Like, what does that really mean? It means that she had a sense that she was unlovable. And so being able to get her into a sense of feeling loved during her poses, I want a lot of snuggles, a lot of kisses on the head for somebody like that.
Mm.
So it's things like that you have to be willing to look back at your conversations and reflect on what they actually mean in order to give your clients the most authentic, best experience for them. It's easy for us to just go out and photograph our couples, right? I could go
Sure.
out and I could photograph my couples, but for them, when I ask those questions and then I pose them to reflect what they've actually said, subconsciously, what they've actually said, that's going to get them to feel so much more connected, not just to me, but to their loved one. And it creates this continuity across the board, not just between their wedding and their engagement, but between their love story. And
And
ultimately, that's what I want to do is encourage the love story.
sure, sure. So, just for the sake of making this interesting conversation, I got to push back a little bit. I'm curious,
That's fine.
at what point do you feel as though you might be projecting onto their situation versus actually understanding what it is? Like, because I'll tell you, first of all, I'm fascinated by psychology, and I'm certainly fascinated by
Yeah.
relationships. In fact, I have a
Yeah.
podcast centered around relationships. It's very, very interesting
Sure.
to me. But there is there are many times, and certainly speaking from personal experience, and I know what happens with other people as well, where we kind of
Yeah.
project our experience onto the other person, And so a statement or
Sure.
an idea, something that they say means something to us maybe differently than it means to those people. And you kind of run the risk in this situation if you're reading into the thing or projecting on it, that you then translate that to the way that you're capturing the couple, and maybe there's a misalignment somewhere in there, and it could potentially cause some issues. So how do you judge this accurately in the end?
I think that if you're present, if you're truly present, and what that comes down to is not thinking about the next pose, not thinking about where you're heading to next, not thinking about what you're going to say next, you're able to establish and understand their body language is going
Sure.
to tell you everything you need to know. So while I
Yeah.
can prep as much as I want to, it's about reading their body language.
Mm.
You know, there are people who I could say they want to snuggle the entire time and they are incredibly uncomfortable with that. And that, but that's something that's my responsibility. It's my responsibility to prep, but it's also my responsibility to be open and available enough to them during those sessions and during their wedding to read the room. Like, nothing is going to be the same when you're doing a Zoom call versus when you're actually meeting somebody face to face. We also can't control the factors that happen before a session.
Right.
You know, I've gotten into sessions before where people are in a crazy fight, like very, very upset with one another. And so getting them into that place, it might look different than I thought it did. And that's okay because I want to be present for them as much as I possibly can.
Fair
So,
enough. Fair enough. Yeah,
yeah.
there is a disconnect that I've seen, pretty significant disconnect, especially going to workshops. And I know workshops are not the same thing as working individually with a client, but when you go to photography workshops or conferences and you're watching photographers photograph a model, the giant disconnect actually between that person taking the picture. Sometimes there's opportunity even for a photographer to be the lead photographer in a group of photographers in that context. And you still see this lack of willingness or effort to engage, to, like you're
Yeah.
talking about, just like truly paying attention, interacting with them, encouraging them. And it really is important at the end of the day to get the best possible finished images, to truly be not, I mean, we can talk about being present, and ultimately that enables us to be in tune with how they're acting, how they're thinking and feeling, and be able to play along with that effectively. So it's a good reminder. And I appreciate you sharing your perspective on that too. And you know, this is kind
Yeah.
of a good way segue to my next question, which has to do with customer experience. And I'm curious, the big idea driving a good customer experience for your business, especially now working with so many photographers. I mean, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. But how do you effectively, collectively provide a really great customer experience for your brand?
So it's going to sound kind of crazy, but I want to make sure my ideal client experience is something that I would want. And so in order for me to understand that, I've had to do a lot of reflecting and a lot of digging deep on who I am and what my core values are.
Okay.
And so every one of my photographers have gone through and we've done a couple of different workshops where we actually evaluate what are your core values and why. So because if you're really ingrained in your core values and understand what those are, it's going to create a better experience for everyone around you. And also it's going to allow you to see what would you want from this versus what other people are getting. Does that answer that question efficiently enough or not really?
Well, I'm curious. So if we're, I guess, kind of playing on what we were talking about earlier too, if we make the process so subjective, I know, first of all, I think it's actually a great idea
Sure.
to start with what it is that you want out of an experience. I certainly have done the same
Hmm.
thing in my businesses as well. And that helps create a baseline, right? You see as an
It
individual an
does.
opportunity, a problem to be solved within a particular business model or an industry, and you go attempt to solve that thing. I think that's a great place to start. But I've also learned the hard way, and I actually have to continue to remind myself that the way that I think isn't the way that everybody thinks. You know,
Sure.
I've been in the industry, for example, for 20 years or so now. I've seen it, I've done it, I've heard it, and frankly, I'm a little bit of a cynic too because of that. So that's kind
Yeah.
of how I think. I think super critically, and I
Hmm.
can kind of see through and hear through the BS and get to the heart of it. And
Yeah.
but I also realize that not every photographer is thinking that way. So, for example, when it comes to marketing my editing company,
Hmm.
I can approach that as the cynic, being like, nobody wants to hear about this, or nobody wants to hear it said that way. But I'm just speaking for myself at that point, and I'm not actually necessarily considering all the potential situations, thoughts, feelings of my potential clients effectively. So how do you
Sure.
balance the value of the subjective approach to providing a good customer experience with making sure that you're also in tune with them?
Well, it is about duality, right? Like it is about understanding that there is the angel and the devil to everything that we do. Nothing is black and white, nothing is straightforward. So I think part of the reason why client experience is so important nowadays is that there are so many options out there. There are so many other places that people could go to, that people could be a part of. But in order for it to be an experience, we really want to create something for our clients.
Mm,
But in order to create something, you have to come from a place of starting to understand who you are and what you would do. Does that make sense? And then being able to go back in and pull back from that. That's where I talk about the duality. So, for example, you were just talking about how you've gotten a little bit cynical with it. Well, maybe that cynic pushes a little bit more forward, but truly being able, I think that we don't take enough time to be still and to actually understand why our thought processes are the way that they are. And so going back through and actually pulling back from that that sense of self, that sense of ego, if you will, right? When I talk about core values, that is ego. It's an ego thing that you have to understand that
sure,
that's who you are.
sure.
However, when you can pull back from that, that's when you can really kind of, when you pull back, you get a bigger picture, right? When you push forward, your vision is more like tunnel vision. And so I think that it's really important to understand with a client experience, what we think is not always what they understand or what they're experiencing, right? So being able to take that wider angle is really, really key. But again, I'm going to go back to knowing who you are is where you have to start from.
Well, I think our personality, or what people tend to call personality, our behavioral tendencies, our interests, our life experience, which drives much of these things, I think that can certainly enable us to create a brand that is, well, to begin with, and to your point, reflective of ourselves, and that's fine. I think a lot of times in our industry, we put so much emphasis on quote unquote who we are, and
Mm-hmm.
we miss a lot of things, including opportunity as a result. But so we can put a certain
Sure.
amount of weight there, and that enables us. I think really the value in what you're saying is, at least from my perspective, is if we're going to create an experience, if building a photography business in 2021, certainly 2022 and beyond, as technology continues to make it easy for pretty much anybody to take a nice picture, I think
Yeah.
experience is what sets apart a good and established business photography business owner from the consumer or the prosumer, shall we call them.
Sure.
And so starting with what it is that you want to create that is hopefully actually different than those around you, and that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately gives so much value that somebody that is going to pay you thousands of dollars, for example, to photograph a wedding, sees that value, feels that value, and doesn't have a problem paying for that value through the
Right.
experience. Great images, sure. And
Mm-hmm.
by the way, the images in your homepage, in fact, I'll pull them up here really quick, as I'm talking to you, are just constantly scrolling. Your work is stunning. So you've done the
Thank
work,
you.
you've made that happen, and that, in my mind, at least with your brand, is a non-issue. So now the challenge, and I'm not just speaking about you here at this point, but for any photographer
It's
that
okay.
knows how to take a decent photograph, then the challenge
Mm-hmm.
becomes, all right, I can take a decent picture. So can 50,000 other photographers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do I create an experience that is unique within the marketplace
Right.
that I am working in? And that part does start with us.
Yeah.
There's an interesting duality that, like as you said, which
Mm-hmm.
is, all right, so this is what I want to create. This is what I think will set me apart because it doesn't seem to exist in this marketplace. But then how do I simultaneously accommodate the real needs and desires of my marketplace without watering that individual unique brand down? And again, there is the ongoing challenge, but it all ultimately centers around experience. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think, honestly, as I'm talking here and I'm hearing what you're saying, I don't think we even have to land anywhere here. I think just the simple highlight of the significance of experience and creating something that is, sure, a reflection of you, but ultimately unique to the space, and continuing to
Yeah.
build on that is just, it is more important than ever in our photography industry.
It's so easy for somebody to just go buy a camera and say they're a photographer now. And that's great, but we want to encourage the community to do the best that we can for our clients, right? Like that's really the key is the end product can be a beautiful photograph, but it can be more. It really can. So,
Right. Well, and I think what we have to kind of get past though too is, I mean, that saying that somebody can go buy a camera and call themselves a photographer, the reality is with this phone right here, I can take better pictures
right,
than most. So
right.
it's not even about being able to buy a camera. It's just, we have access through all the different softwares, which are relatively inexpensive at this point, and through,
Yeah.
something like a $500 to $1,000 phone to take really beautiful images and run
Yeah.
a successful business if we want to.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a reality.
100%.
And that narrative that we heard for a long time, I heard it actually when the transition from film to digital photography happened. And I think we're in a similar space right now in that we're moving. It's not that we're moving from DSLRs to phones, but it's the reality is that there was an opportunity there for that. And so whether it was from film to digital or now from DSLRs to potentially shooting with phones in some cases, the narrative, which is the established professional talking down to the idea that somebody can so easily go take a good picture now, it kind of, it not only misses the point, it actually maybe inhibits us from being able to be as competitive as we can. That's just the simple reality. And I think I've told this before on the podcast, but I used to go to, we had a local film lab here in the Chattanooga area. When I was shooting film, I would take my film, drop it off, they'd process it. I've had prints made. I was shooting it with a Russian panoramic camera. They would scan the film in and create prints for me for it. And I would go to the lab owner. This guy he was a talker. You'd go in and you're waiting on your order or whatever, and he's just chatting away. And as the industry shifted to online galleries, at the time we were using a service called Pictage. Now, of course, there are any number of galleries out there that are options for photographers. But as the industry was shifting to online galleries, the ability to be able to order prints online, and he saw that eating into his business, he complained about it. And rather than thinking about how he could change the experience that he was creating for
Right.
his clients in order to match what the industry was doing, he just complained about it. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a surprise. And he did this over and over again. And I'd kind of heard enough, after 5, 6, 7, 8 times or whatever, hearing him saying this. And I finally said to him, I kind of confronted him on it in a way similar to what we're talking about now, that you can't just complain about it. You can't whine about it. You got to do
No.
something about it. You got to shift with the times,
Yeah.
basically. And that's what we have to keep in mind as photographers now. And that's why, just to kind of bring it back around, and I promise for everybody listening and watching, we'll keep going. But to bring it back around, the experience, we have to be sensitive to where we are in our industry at the moment, what our culture is talking about, what they're doing, and what the market is saying, because we can't control that. As much as, egotistical photographers that we are and artist types, and we're so proud of everything that we do, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The market ultimately is way bigger than us, and it decides where it's going. So do we kind of stay on our little pedestal and continue thought processes that we've had for all these years, or do we keep an open mind and shift and adjust and ultimately create an experience, knowing that technology makes a good photograph a dime a dozen now? Do we shift and focus on the experience now and make
Yeah.
that the priority? I think that's where we're at. I didn't mean to
Mm-hmm.
go on that kind of that long a monologue, Christora, but I appreciate you kind of bringing this all up.
No, I just 100% agree with you. I think that the second that we stop learning, we stop serving our clients in the most effective way. Because I mean, I used to not use off-camera flash at all. And then I realized, like you were saying, that somebody was taking a photograph on a phone. And if I didn't differentiate myself in some other way, I was going to become obsolete. And
Mm.
so being able to go in and learn, like that's really key is being open to learning. Open to learning means that you're open to new experiences. It means you're open to failing. And that's really the key to progress.
Well, and I think we're going to learn more about just that as we talk about how you started your photography business here in a second. Again, I didn't
Yeah,
mean to kind of catch us up for so long on this point. I
it's
do want to
okay.
throw in Paula, who's on YouTube watching today. She said, that's so true. So many people can take a pretty picture, really trying to figure out what I want my client's experience to be and how that is unique to other photographers and what I'm working on. And Paula, you beautifully
Hmm.
summed it up. And by the way, did a much better job in much more succinct way than I did. I took a long time to say all that. But beautifully summed up. And that's exactly it. Anybody can take a decent
Hmm.
picture now, thanks to these crazy phones that are, I mean, honestly, it's pretty amazing. You take a picture and you're like, how in the world? It wasn't, in fact, the other day, my daughter, and I think I mentioned this in the last podcast episode, but my daughter came home, she had taken an old Nikon D300 out and taken some pictures with it. And I was looking at the finished results from those pictures and then thinking about what I can take with this iPhone. And it's not even close. And that used to be a quote unquote professional camera, right? So
Hmm.
anyway, technology is going to continue to progress and pretty quickly. And we can
Hmm.
no longer set ourselves apart by, as Paula said, taking a pretty picture. We have to now think
Hmm.
about the experience that we're creating. And it's not pretty much anybody can take a pretty picture. It's not everybody that wants to put the time, the effort, energy, first of all, to running an actual business and all that's involved in that. But then ultimately creating an experience that is unique, that makes them stand out. Not everybody's willing to put the time and effort and energy. And I think that is where the differentiating factor is going to be moving forward for an established professional who wants to shoot full time, charging premium prices. That's where it's going to be at. So, all right. Well, Paula, I
Yeah.
appreciate your comments. And by the way, for everybody else listening in or watching, please don't hesitate to comment, ask questions. I promise we're going to keep moving through this outline. Thanks, Christora, for your patience too.
No problem.
Sometimes we just sit on these topics, and I have to remember this podcast is not about me; it's about interviewing our guests. So we'll keep going. Talk to me a little bit about time management. Speaking of better time management, when it comes to running a business, having a life, family, friends, how do you find balance in? I guess between those two, and I realize balance it's a funny word because it's different for everybody. But for you, how do you keep from getting burnout and ultimately still having a life outside of work?
Delegation has been key for me moving forward. I actually just retired from being an educator this past May. So I was doing education and running a full-time studio at the same time,
Wow.
teaching high school. It was like when I say I worked from 6 a.m. to 8:30 p.m., it was absolutely awful.
Hmm.
And so one of the conversations my husband and I had before I left education was that having established hours of operation was going to be really key. And so I have stuck with those hours of operation. There are dentists who you have to take the day off in order to go and get your teeth cleaned. Like from 9 to 5, they're open. They're not open on the weekends. They're not open during these other times. I want those people who value photography, and I have to value my time first and foremost in order to get those clients in. So at least that's the way that I have found higher quality clientele is by valuing my own time
Yeah.
and not bending over backwards with, yeah, let's meet at 8 p.m. or of course I can take your photographs, at 7:30 on a Friday night.
Right.
Like, no, I've had to establish boundaries with
Mm-hmm.
that. And I have found that my ability to release control was something that I definitely struggled with initially. I think that's something that as you progress in your business, that's the only way to progress is to give away some of the work that goes into running a business. If you're not going to give away some of the work that goes into running a business, we worship the grind. Like this United States of America worships the grind. And if you're not grinding and you're not working all the time and burned out, then you're not quote unquote doing it right.
Mm.
And I don't agree.
Mm.
I don't agree with that. I run this business to have freedom and to have peace of mind and to have time with my husband and to do something I love. So if I'm not giving away my editing, if I'm not allowing somebody else to help me with blogging, to run my social media presence, all of those things are things that are time, and time is our most valuable resource that any of us have. Time with family, time with friends, time to relax, time to be active. All of those things are things that you can't get back. Like it's a finite resource if you think about it. Time is just something I don't think we value enough of.
Yeah.
And so by giving away and releasing that control, you actually have more control over what you decide is important and what you decide you want to do.
That's really great, and you've kind of set me up beautifully for my next question about delegation. So I'll get to that in just a second. But there are a couple of things you mentioned. One, we do kind of worship the grind, and I can speak from personal experience in that when I set out to create Photographers Edit, I wanted to create a business that gave me more flexibility. So it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
about it was ultimately about creating systems that help run a business efficiently so I had more flexibility. And I was literally able within a few years to work as little as about 4 hours a week. People laugh at the
Sure.
4-hour work week title that Tim Ferriss wrote a number of years ago, but it can actually happen if you set that intention and put the right systems in place.
Mm-hmm.
The caveat is that you only grow so much when you're only willing to put so much work in. So where I would push back is that there is something to be said for putting hard work in if we want to actually build something, because I think social media culture, it's easy to see the end result and not all the work that goes into that end result. But then the flip side of that is if we put so much into, like, if work is all we know. In fact, I had the chance to,
Right.
this was years ago, but to one evening, actually, I was out in a yacht with a number of people from the photography industry. This was, I think we were in LA, or the LA area. And I will, of course, not going to mention names, but one of the most well-known wedding photographers in our industry ever was on this boat. And I noticed particularly that evening that this individual was outside of the conversation around photography and the photography industry and technology. They were extremely uncomfortable in conversation. And
Oh,
to be clear, this
interesting.
is a very extreme example, but we certainly see it. I've seen it in my life elsewhere as well. If we only know work, if the way that we identify ourselves and function on a day-to-day basis is work, and then when work's not happening, we're kind of like, what do we do? What do I talk about? How do I even carry myself? We know that we've gotten to a pretty bad spot. So there is opportunity in life, as you point out, for the important relationships. There are opportunities in life to learn and develop skills and have hobbies and travel, and it's so many different opportunities. And if we literally build our lives around work, we're missing out on so many levels. I'm glad that you highlight that. And I have to ask you too, you're talking about your husband. What do you all do,
Yeah.
like, just to create time for the two of you? Because myself and my girlfriend Jill, who also produces this podcast, we talk about this, like, how can we set time aside and do date nights and this kind of thing? What do you all do to make that happen?
So one of the things that we did initially when we first got together was we did a hobby evaluation. And so we figured out what the other person really liked. And so
Hmm.
one day a week we actually go and we attempt. I hate karaoke. I absolutely hate it, but I will attempt it. It's fine.
Okay.
But
Okay.
we attempt to go and build the other one up. And so 2 days out of the week, it's based on what's going to fill that one person. And so, but we know that putting everything into that, we're going to get something else out of it as well, because we're very different people. Like,
Hmm.
he is very down to earth, very logical. He's a physicist.
Okay.
Like, I'm a dreamer. I
Yeah.
have a free spirit.
Yeah.
I've lived in 4 other countries. Like,
Hmm.
he would never even think about that kind of stuff. And so, in order for us to find that balance, we have to fill each other up. It's about filling each other's cup. Being intentional with our time, though, is also something that we've had to work on. In particular, when I was still teaching and running the business, and now I have a lot more time to be able to dedicate to it. It's so easy for us to just fall into TV and phones, and I don't think we're alone in that. In the idea of, okay, we're going to be together, but not actually have any kind of quality time to it. So being intentional with when our quality is happening has been something that's been game changing for us in our marriage and in our relationship.
So so a couple of things. The intentionality
Go ahead.
behind creating space. I think this has come up a number of times on the podcast, but it's funny how a lot of times we complicate a situation necessarily when really it could just be as simple as saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, and we make it happen.
Hmm. Yep.
Prioritizing. So I love that reminder, and I need that reminder, so it's good. The the other thing that you're talking about is learning how, because I know a lot of photographers are working with their partner, and then others
Hmm.
just are in a relationship and they have to juggle work and time personally. And so there's a personal relationship there. Learning
Hmm.
how to play to the other person's interests in kind of a balanced way is an interesting point of conversation. I think we could even do like a whole podcast series on just relationships and running a business, like balancing that.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Um, how long have you guys been together?
Married 10 years next summer.
Wow, congratulations. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's cool.
Thank you. Thank
So,
you.
but you're,
He's definitely my yin to yang.
yeah.
He brings me down when I need to be brought down. So
I laugh because
it's
Jill's
great.
very similar for me. I'm definitely the more emotive, emotional
Yeah.
dreamer type,
Yep.
and she helps kind of even me out a little bit, which is much needed at times. But
Yeah.
so is there? I mean, you talked about karaoke. What's one or two of the other activities that you guys have figured out is like kind of brings enjoyment for both?
Um, so golf is a big one. He really loves golf. For me personally, it's exercise. So he'll go to an exercise class with me once a week, which to me that fills me up more than anything. Like seeing him take an interest in going to Orange Theory is just it's fantastic, right? Like
It's also the
it
best
makes my
workout ever.
oh my gosh, the best workout
It's
ever.
so good. Yeah, for anybody
Yeah.
listening or watching, if you've never done an Orange Theory class, it's challenging to be clear, but oh my word, you walk out of there, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah, so we do trivia. So he is actually a trivia host 2 nights a week. So I go to his my like promise to him is that I'm there for half of the time that he's actually being the trivia host. And so like but again, it's the intentionality. When he knows I'm there, he'll actually add songs to a playlist that he doesn't like, but he knows I like. And it's those little things that we've been really intentional. Now we don't have any kids, which so we have the time for intentionality. We have, but we've established that this is what we want from our relationship,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Other people might be in a different boat, and that's okay too, right? It's just depending on who you are with your partner and also understanding that you are not just a couple. So I'm an individual person, and if I am only doing what he wants, that's not going to fulfill me. If we're only doing what I want, that's not going to fulfill him. And a
Hmm.
happy partner means that my life, he encourages me in ways that I don't think that I would have been encouraged had we not been so intentional with how we have established this life together, if that
Mm.
makes sense. It sounds really lovey-dovey, right? Like
Well,
we fight all the time. Don't worry.
well, no, and you actually bring up a really interesting topic, which we'll save for another day because it'll take us even further down another rabbit trail. But codependence is an interesting point of conversation in our culture
Hmm.
because of the way that romance has been kind of depicted for so long, especially through pop culture. And by the way, I bought into
Sure.
it too. And I think that a lot of that still can exist. I still
Hmm.
am very much a romantic, but I also think that, to your point, the significance of individuality can't be missed. And in fact, if it does get missed, it actually affects the romantic side of the relationship on multiple levels. So I love that you found that. I also love
Hmm.
the significance that you highlight of paying attention to the other person's interests. And it may seem obvious to a lot of people, but I think especially in relationships that go on for any period of time, it's very easy to just kind of be blinders on and you do what you want when you want to, when you feel like it. If you don't feel like it and you're not interested, then you're like, I'm not interested in that, so I'm not going to do that. When the reality is that just a little
Yeah.
bit of effort in doing the thing that your partner's interested in, which goes so far, and done
Right.
like you were talking about on a consistent basis like that it makes a massive difference. So these are really great points. Maybe
Yeah.
we can do a whole separate podcast episode on relationships at some point. I want to very quickly
Sure.
just hit on two last questions before we get into our main topic. Number one, you talked about delegation and how
Hmm.
that makes a big difference when it comes to time management. What types of things do you delegate in your business?
I have a virtual assistant who handles all of my blogging, my publications, submission to vendors after the fact. I have a social media manager who, well, I have 4 different social media platforms across 4 different businesses across the board for social media. And so that in and of itself could take up all of my time. But instead, we have a great system in place where she handles all of that. My editing, I'm currently in the process of looking for somebody. So
I
that is
happen to
like
know
my
this great
last.
company, in case
I
you need
happen
some
to have
help.
already reached out to you. Don't you worry.
Shout out
So
to Photographers Edit. Anybody
shout out to
listening in?
photographers edit.
With the
So
VA,
funny. So yeah.
how did you go about finding a virtual assistant? Did you use a service, third party service, or how did you do that?
So I actually had an assistant who was working for me, and then she ended up moving to Texas. And so I started talking to a couple of friends. They knew of a few of their friends from like a past life who had started a VA company. So I just kind of got lucky where I found this one VA who she's phenomenal. And so my assistant is actually still with me. She'll be moving to Texas in December. And so that VA will be taking over everything that my assistant was doing. Does that make sense?
So, and what would you say through the process of hiring a VA? Just name one or two principles that drive a successful relationship there, especially when you're handing something over to somebody who you don't really know personally. How do you best handle the communication that enables that to be a successful relationship?
Well, I think the key with delegation is praise, praise first. Like, what do you like that they're doing first? And then walking them through what could have been done a little bit differently. Because especially with a relationship where it's virtual,
Mm.
you know, I have somebody who does my social media. Like I said, she is not in town. She's not here. So when we get together, I will walk her through and say, I loved this particular post that you made. I loved this that you did on Facebook. I really enjoyed what you did with TikTok over here. What can we do differently with these three? And so giving her concrete examples of what I like and dislike, I think that so oftentimes we're afraid of the bluntness of being blunt with what we actually want. And so being able to come in and tell them not just this is really poorly done, but also saying this is really well done.
Yeah.
So giving somebody where you want them to go versus where they're at right now is going to create a better direction, and also giving them some grace. It's a learning process to really understand what somebody's looking for. And so one of the things I want to constantly do, not giving them, the freedom to screw it up. That's not what I'm trying to say. There's a big difference between grace and when somebody really screws it up. But if they're trying and they're moving slowly towards it, you're actually building a better relationship with that slow build than a quick knows everything that you want right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. We've gone through a number of different employees over the last few years. In some cases where we hired too fast, but
Mm-hmm.
the relationships that I was willing to invest in
Mm-hmm.
seemed to. I mean, obviously, if you see red flags at the outset, you have to say no, this doesn't work. But beyond that, you're absolutely right. Investing in those relationships that have ultimately lasted the longest and have had most benefit to our brands has just been really important. It is true that the patience is important. You have to set aside ego and the notion that we have it all figured out. I am curious though, and
Mm-hmm.
the reason I smiled earlier is I was thinking about the idea of coming in with a compliment before you then give them constructive criticism. Is there a chance in those cases that you begin to develop this pattern in the employee's mind that, oh, she's complimenting me, I got to get ready for the criticism coming right after that?
No, because I don't. That's only when I actually need. I only do that when I actually want something differently done. And
Okay.
I won't always come in with a compliment, if that makes any sense. But I want to be able to give them a concrete example of what they've done well. If there was something that they did well, that's what I want to start with. Because I want them to understand that, yes, you did accomplish this in this particular location. Now let's talk about how we can bring all of these other aspects to that example that I gave you at the beginning. If they have an example of what is correct, that's easier to go towards than never seeing something like that. So a
Hmm.
compliment is not necessarily the way that's the wrong word to use. It's more of like a concrete example of what was done well.
Okay.
So I just think of it like that.
Yeah, no, that
I
that
just think
makes.
of it like, does that make more sense?
I know it totally makes sense. Absolutely, and I got what you were saying at first too. I also
Yeah.
know, again, just being a bit of a critical thinker and thinking about human psychology and the way that I'm interacting with
Right.
people, whether it's my employees or my girlfriend or my kids. I know how people think, and pretty well
Sure.
at least. And so I'm just thinking about how they're processing that on the other side. And I'm a little bit of a cynic, so then I start to think about that kind of stuff then too. I'm like, because even growing up, like my dad used to talk about to us about how do we approach conversation, like tough conversation. How do we do that?
Hmm.
And it was
Yeah.
basically a version of what you just said, which is lead with the positive, and then
Hmm.
go to what could be potentially a challenging part of the conversation. And so I can just imagine
Well,
that people start to develop that pattern in their head. They're like, oh shoot, like are they getting ready to give me some constructive criticism as well?
but to go back to that,
Yeah.
if I'm having a meeting with you, would you expect, unless it's a meeting where I've asked you and I just say, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know how great you're doing," would you not expect that there would be something that we would talk about to work towards something else?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Like,
To be clear, this is not a
is
criticism of the thought process.
no, no,
I'm
no.
just laughing out loud with you. This is all. I was just thinking about
Yeah,
the psychology involved in all of that.
yeah,
When I have meetings with my team, for example, they're normally pre-scheduled. So we have certain days of the
sure.
week where, for example, Jill and I meet together. A certain day where I meet with our head of customer service. Certain day where I meet with our operations manager, or one of our operations managers, and they're kind of broken down. Our team meetings a different day, broken down through the week. So the meetings are already established. So there's not really a concern, I think, at that point going into those meetings about what it is that we're going to talk about. There's opportunity to talk about things that we need to work on, things that are great, et cetera. But
Sure.
yeah, I was just honestly, this is just me internally laughing, just thinking about the psychology involved. I think generally the principle that you're talking about is actually a really great approach, because the last thing that somebody wants is just to be like for you to come in guns blazing and go hard at you, and you're overwhelmed,
Right.
especially if you're a new employee and you're like, but I was trying and I thought this is what you meant, and that kind of thing. So yeah, lead with the positive
Yeah.
always. I think is a great way to go.
Well, and have a concrete place that you're trying to lead them towards.
Mm,
That's the key with delegation.
yeah.
The key with delegation is to be able to demonstrate and then release.
Mm,
Demonstrate, release. And it's not a one time they're going to get it.
so
Like
true.
it's never going to be that way.
So true.
But if you can show them, it's almost like leading them and then letting them walk ahead of you. And then coming back and leading them and then letting them walk ahead of you.
Mm, hmm.
That's the key to delegation in my experience.
That's no, that's a
So,
brilliant summation. And again, a good reminder for me too, as I think about how I work with my team and then hire other people. It's really true, because unless you get out of the way and let them do their thing, there's
yeah.
little opportunity for growth. And I've seen it, and because I was a
Yeah.
poor manager, there have been times where I see this behavior, which is like almost a fear of kind of taking their own initiative, because it's like, is
Sure.
Nathan going to say that this is not quite the, and that's where I know I'm being too hard or I'm being too restrictive, and I need to do a better job of training, number one, but then give them more space to do their own thing. And it's right.
Yeah.
You're right. This is applicable in really all types of delegation. I'm thinking about post production too. Outsource editing. It is a relationship,
Yeah.
and it is an ongoing process that involves significant amounts of communication. A lot of photographers give
Yeah.
up because they just want to dump the images and then expect everything just to turn out perfectly, and it just doesn't work that way. There's a relationship involved in that on an ongoing basis, and communication is so key. So you set a premise for delegation here that we haven't quite had explained the way that you just did, and I think it's a really really good food for thought for our listeners. I appreciate that. Last quick
Thank
question.
you.
And
Yeah.
we'll actually do this quick this time, because we still have
Okay.
so much to get to. This might be a longer episode than we normally have. That's fine. Talk to me about one of the most impactful self-help or business books that you've read that you would want to recommend to our listeners. You think would be helpful in their life or their business?
I think that one of the main keys that everyone needs to understand with running a business is that motivation will fade. So if you are not disciplined in your habits, and so Atomic Habits by James, I wrote it down. There it is, James Clear.
Yeah,
James Clear, Atomic Habits by James Clear
yeah.
was life changing for me. It taught me how to actually reward myself slowly to build a habit, but not to a point where I was hurting myself. And so, in order to understand how to build discipline, you have to start small.
Hmm.
So, the smaller that you can start with your discipline, and then the building on top of that is going to encourage you and help you with continuing your business along the way. I just found that book phenomenal.
And I pulled it up here on the screen on Amazon, Atomic Habits, James Clear, Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results. Honestly, though, Christora, if maybe the most impactful thing you've said yet today is that phrase, that statement, that motivation will fade. Because we live in a culture right now where there's all this motivational quotes and watching videos and this kind of thing. And I think we've in some ways kind of developed the subconscious quote unquote need to have that in order to even function, rather than learning to actually enjoy the day by day process. It's not this idea that something always has to feel good or that we just love doing it in order to do it. It's so limiting to our life anyway, that's it. You've said all these things today. You just get me going on all these rants. We had too many good topics. But anyway, it's so true. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out. Atomic Habits, we'll put it in the show notes, bokehpodcast.com. And for anybody who's curious, you can go to the show notes today. All the talking points, the resources that we discuss will be there at bokehpodcast.com or in the show notes of your favorite podcast player. All right. So we said, here we are 45 minutes later, but we said we were going to talk about the challenges facing and ultimately dealing with the challenges of starting a new photography business. Remind me, first of all, how long ago did you start photographing professionally?
8 years.
8 years.
So it's been, I started the business actually October 13th, 2013. I know the exact day.
Wow.
So
almost exactly 8 years then. That's awesome.
Almost, yeah, we went and celebrated 2 days ago. So it was great.
Oh, good for you. Okay. So
thank you.
Starting a new business, it can be certainly a mixed bag. And we all have the backstories to our businesses. What would you say are 3 things that, especially new photographers that might be listening, or those that are just getting their business started, what are 3 things that they can expect in the process of starting a business?
I think that one thing that I did not expect, and so this is definitely something that you should understand, is the cost of starting a business and the cost of doing business are 2 completely different things. For example, I first started because a friend of mine asked me to take engagement pictures with a camera that I bought, and I got out there and I loved it, and I went home and I filed to become an LLC. Like I literally filed the day after I took my very first session because I knew that that's what I was looking for. Hey, bud, come on over here. Go jump up. Go on, go jump up.
We have a dog who's
joining
the conversation.
Thank you. Yes. Apologies.
What's his name or her name?
He's very needy. His name's Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
Okay. And he's just going to pace. He's just going to pace.
No worries at all. No worries at all.
So I think that was one of the biggest shocks to me was equipment costs, the editing software, your website management, your travel costs, your taxes, and also the time away from your family. Yeah. So to your point earlier, when you were talking about hard working versus the grind, you have to put in hard work when you first begin. Like there has to be a time where you really are nose to the ground. I want this to work so badly that I'm going to do everything in my power to get there. But establishing those habits early on can really be hard to break later. That's really the key, is understanding that time away from your family is also a cost of doing business. Especially for wedding photographers, Saturdays are gone. Like I no longer watch college football, and I love college football, but it's something that I've given up because I want this so badly. And now I'm getting to the point where I have enough photographers where if I really have a game that I want to see, I can send one of them. I really can, because I know and I understand that the training process that went into it. I'm getting away from the question though. The second thing that I think that you can really expect is that people are not just going to come to you when they see your photos. That is, marketing is a key proponent of this. And there are photographers out there who will not have or might not have as great of photos as you, but they understand marketing in a way that you don't. And so their growth is going to exponentially go past you. If you want to start a business, you need to understand how to market. And then the third thing would probably be expect to fail. Expect that there will be moments of disappointment, and that there will be moments where you have to remove your ego from the situation in order to grow. I know for me personally, I didn't actually start to understand my failure until I came across SMART goals. Have you ever used SMART goals, Nathan?
I haven't. No.
Okay, so SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable,
Oh,
relative, and timely. You have, yeah.
yeah.
Everybody has,
I just,
but
yeah, I forgot the acronym, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And so by doing that, it allowed me to not only not just look at my failure and say, okay, I failed, but to look at my failure and say, why? And then also to revamp my goals. Maybe it just needed a small tweak. And it wasn't that I didn't meet my goal. It was that I needed to change one aspect of it in order to get where I needed to be.
Hmm.
So those were the three things that I think people don't really expect: the failure, the cost of doing business, and probably a portion of time where you don't understand your marketing. You know, you're very fortunate if you start off with a marketing background and you walk into a photography business, because you're going to understand a little bit better how to get yourself out there, how to put yourself forward to other people. There's a difference between reactive marketing and proactive marketing. So, for example, putting myself on the Knot or Wedding Wire, that's going to be reactive. Somebody who is engaged is going to come there, they're going to compare me to my competitors, they're going to reach out, and they're going to make a decision. Proactive marketing is going after those vendors I really want to work with, reaching out to the venues who I want to be a part of, submitting myself for publication in magazines, getting onto podcasts like this. You know, those are the different aspects of proactive marketing that I don't know that a lot of people really understand, because we think that when we put ourselves into a directory, that's marketing. Having a website is marketing, but it's more than that. It's
Hmm.
so much more than that. You
Yeah.
have to be proactive with going out and getting yourself seen, getting yourself heard, you know, even getting yourself read, like
Hmm.
blogging for not just your own website, but blogging for other vendors, blogging for other venues. I know that different places around the country will actually take blog submissions from photographers. So you can reach out to your local radio station, your local television station, and pitch something about, you know, senior sessions because of the pandemic. Like things like that are going to get you a different sense of return on investment than simply a reactive marketing scheme.
Yeah, it's true. Well, and let's actually kind of transition into this conversation about marketing too. And
Sure.
I know that you have, I think, four different challenges that you said you had faced in marketing your business, especially as a new business owner. And I'm curious if you can kind of break down each of those and then ultimately how you faced those, overcame them, or maybe are still on an ongoing basis overcoming them.
I think we're always ongoing overcoming, right?
Fair.
There's always better, more efficient, interesting things popping up.
Yeah.
And so I would say ongoing is a moot point because it has to be that way. The first thing was definitely learning about reactive versus proactive. I had never considered that just being out there was never going to bring me in the clientele that I wanted. But now I'm able to go out, and one of the things that I've done is I've established where once a quarter I do a styled shoot. And I try and reach out to vendors who either A, I haven't worked with and I want to work with, or B, vendors who I love and I know that they would love the content. So continuously establishing those relationships back and forth. And then when you walk into a wedding day, I don't know if were you ever a wedding photographer,
Yeah.
Nathan?
For about a decade.
Okay. So you know how you walk into a wedding and you're just like, oh, it's family. Like, okay, the hair and makeup artist is perfect. I know the venue coordinator. Like, how's your kid doing?
Yeah.
It's those kind of relational
Hmm.
building that actually encourage them to market for you even more.
100%.
And yeah, so that was one thing. Nathan saw this at the beginning of our of our podcast. I am not a tech girl. I think I hung up on you 3 times. Is that right?
No worries. No worries.
Okay. So understanding SEO, somebody starts to talk about search engine optimization to me, and Lord, I am not a tech girl at all. I It just goes right over my head. I tend to think of myself as an intelligent person and I feel so dumb. So sending that out to somebody else and allowing them to do my search engine optimization for me has changed my marketing as well. But also going in and doing the work with SEO, because you have to be blogging, you have to put yourself out there, you need the backlinks. And if you don't know what I'm saying right now, do your research
Mm-hmm.
or have somebody teach it to you who knows about
Mm-hmm.
it. That's one thing that I don't think that we do enough of. Um, that I don't think that we do enough of as photographers is reach out to one another when we see somebody doing a job well done. I know that you preach it as well, community over competition. Like, I've reached out to numerous people and said, how did you do this? And maybe they have not said, hey, I definitely am going to tell you, but somebody is willing to help. And I'm willing to help other people in return because of that. Um, the third thing that I did for my marketing was I did my research about my competition and I did my research about my market. If you have never conducted like a marketing research of your own, I highly encourage that you go in and you figure out who are your competitors. And I don't mean like, hey, every single person on the knot. Absolutely not, because that is not your competitor. My competitor is not a light and airy photographer. My competitor is not an all natural photographer. My competitor is, I only have two in my area who are off camera flash, true to color photographers. And so that means that when you see this entire choice that you have for your wedding decision for photography, really, if you have a style that says that, there's only three. That's it. Only three in the city of Louisville. And so understanding who you are actually competing with is going to also bring you along further in your marketing ability and in understanding and not feeling like you're overwhelmed in a field of photographers.
What
Um,
does that
Go ahead.
market research process look like? Because when I do brand position consultations, for example, on the podcast, it's honestly for me, it's as simple as just doing a Google search, the genre of photography and that marketplace. That gets me a head
Yeah.
start, right? You can get much more detailed than that. I
Yep.
can look at keywords and how that relates to what I searched, and there are a number of things you can do. But just starting with the Google search, I wonder how many photographers have, speaking of proactive work, proactively gone and just done that and scanned through the first 3-4 pages of results, looking at photographers in the market, looking, again, going back to our earlier conversation, I think style only plays so much of a role. I think it does to a
Hmm.
point, but at the end of the day, we're all using the same Lightroom presets. We're all shooting the same
Right.
way. Like there's, and I say that very broadly to be clear, but
I know.
there's a lot of similarity there. And the reality is that most of the clients on the other side don't know the nuanced differences that we see. So style is one thing, but if we actually start looking at the services that are being offered, how the services are being communicated, the price point,
Yep.
the brand experience, there are a number of factors we can look at and compare ourselves against. Is that what you're talking about, or do
Absolutely.
you take a different approach?
No, 100%. That's exactly it. I started where I went in and looked at the style. And then I went in and looked at the copyright. Like the copywriting is going to tell you a lot about,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have not gone in and focused on your copywriting, it's something that you 100% need to do. And honestly, I'm preaching to myself because I went in the other day and reread mine and I was like, oh, girl, you got some work to do.
Isn't it
You
funny how
got
that
some work
works?
to do.
Yeah.
But again, it's the ongoing changes. And you have to
Yep.
be willing to like continuously update and continuously change. And as I learn and as I grow, that's I have to be willing to go back to what used to be there and revamp it. And that's really gonna help you to grow even further. So, and then it's not like you have to have a set time to go back and to revamp things, but
Mm-hmm.
just understanding that life is fluid. Who you are as a photographer will be fluid. How you photograph will change.
Mm.
How you relate to your clientele will change. I'm almost 40. Like 8 years ago, I did not have the pain that I have the day after. That photographer hangover is real.
Sure. Yeah.
It's so real.
Yeah.
So, and then the final thing that I did was every quarter I write out SMART goals. So that was a big change over for me with my marketing because those SMART goals allow me to actually go back, look at my marketing in an effective, concrete way and measure them against where I want it to be versus where I'm going. And then I'm able to actually go in and write new goals afterwards. So I have my large overarching goals but then I also break them down into smaller, more attainable ones along the way that then I can revamp throughout the year. So
And I was just, as you were talking, I was pulling back up my
this is,
notes. I use Evernote as my endless collection of notes and documents. I think I have something like
yeah.
close to 17,000 documents in there right now, but literally, like I'm not joking. But I did a quick search on SMART Goal because when you said that earlier, initially I blanked, but then remembered that I had looked into this and specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And you
Mm-hmm.
said you do this once a year. You were talking about looking at the revamp of your business, or not even a revamp, just an adjustment, tweaking, refinement of your business. That it doesn't
Yeah,
have to be a certain in certain intervals, but actually, along with
no,
this
it doesn't.
annual review of SMART goals, it seems like it might be a really good idea to at least once a year, maybe during slow season, off season, to go back and look at where your business is in comparison to your competition. I actually have in my kind of monthly to-do list, or have had in my monthly to-do list, just that for my business. So not just annually, but
Mm-hmm.
monthly, looking at what my
Yeah,
competitors are saying, because that enables me to be able, and ultimately what they're offering, if their service model has changed, because it enables me to more effectively market when I can position myself in contrast to what it is that they're doing.
absolutely. 100%. I think again, we have to build the space into our lives for reflection. And that doesn't necessarily just go back to us and our businesses, but also to the businesses that are around us and the photography community as a whole. Like, if you're not willing to give yourself that time and that space to look through those things that are happening, you're going to miss it. And then you're going to be just like your Russian panoramic film guy and you're going to complain,
Yep.
right?
It's so true.
Yeah.
I think
So, sorry.
the Russian panoramic film guide, that's what I'm going to call him moving on. Yeah, that's good. I like the label. Okay, so I have one last question for you, and this has to do with kind of going back to a topic that we hit on briefly earlier, which is balancing business and personal life, especially at the outside of a business. I know that you already shared some ideas on how you're doing that, but can you comment a little bit more about how to approach this, especially for a new photographer being super overwhelmed, just trying to figure so many different things out all at once, and putting in the hard work like you were talking about to go ahead and get that business off the ground, but then still wanting to be able to sleep at night and spend time with the important people in their life. How do you recommend they approach that?
So, to clarify, we're going to have to go hard at the beginning. Like, you're going to have to go hard, but also understand that there is always something more to do. Even now that I'm delegating all of these things out, I'm finding other areas and other aspects that I could potentially fill that time with if I wanted to.
So true. Yep.
So the intentionality behind it all comes down to intentionality. It all comes down, and it comes down to following your word. So if you make a promise to yourself that you're done at 4 o'clock and then you break that promise, what does that really say? That says that you're not valuing yourself enough. And in the end, yes, while you're putting in that hard work towards this business, what is that actually building if it's taking away from who you are and from the lifestyle that you want to lead? So one of the things that I would definitely recommend for somebody who's just starting out is to slow down. Slow yourself down a little bit. Don't rush through your editing. Don't
Or just don't do your
worry as
editing.
much. Just don't do your editing. Just send it to somebody else. Start that way right away, and you
There you
never
go. There you go.
have to go back. That's
Yeah.
much better. But again, it just comes down to it really comes down to making promises to yourself and keeping those promises, the discipline that comes with that. And yeah, I had days this past month or 2 months, I was so motivated, right? And motivation, like we said before, it comes and goes. But I was so motivated where I could have worked from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on something to do with the business. And at 4 p.m., I have made that promise to myself. And so that is when I'm going to put everything to do with photography away. I'm going to focus on my husband and we're going to figure out how we're going to connect that night. And if it's not that we're connecting that night, cool. I might be able to go back in and do it. But I've made that decision that I am going to stop at 4
Hmm.
and check in with him before we go forward and we do anything else.
Hmm.
I think establishing your boundaries is really key when you first start a business. So I did not do that. And I will say that I got so burned out. My third year of business, I was so sick. I think I missed like 28 or 29 days of school, which in a 176 school year is a lot of time. Okay. So that burnout led me to actually evaluate why I was pushing so hard.
Hmm.
And then it came down to, okay, you need to release this, let go of this, let it go that way. But if I can help somebody else to not do that initially,
Yeah.
and to understand that the grind is different than hard work. The grind is where you're worn down, you're not able to sleep, you have insomnia because you have so much going on, you have so much to think about, you almost can't catch up with your own thoughts. Versus hard work is where you know that you've accomplished something. And we don't do this enough in general, but when you accomplish something, celebrate the small successes, especially when you start off with a business. I'll never forget, my husband was like, why are you so disappointed that you hit 10 weddings this year and I know you wanted 12. And that was my second year in business. You hit 10 weddings this year. I know you wanted 12. Why are you disappointed? You had 4 last year. And it took him speaking some truth into my life to say, slow down and celebrate what you've accomplished instead of, oh my gosh, I'm not there and I'm not enough. So,
yeah. So I was taking notes here as you were talking, and in case for anybody who's listening in or watching for that matter, what you don't see, first of all, is my screen. I have this control panel going on here, and then sometimes I have to remember when I switch to full screen on my guests, they may still be able to see me as I'm looking around. They're like, "What is he looking down for? Is he playing on his phone? Like, what's going on?" But I was actually taking notes. So, but I wrote down. You talked about slow down. I mean, we have almost 3 or 4 important points just in this. Slow down. Small steps consistently is what I wrote down, just kind of based on what you were saying. And you make such a great point, which is especially at the outset, but actually not even just especially at the outset, really all the time as business owners, especially if we've been intentional and we've been intelligent in the moves that we've made, we're going to have a working business. And there is always going to be something that needs to be done that didn't quote unquote get done. And I face this now close to 20 years into being an entrepreneur. And I'm reminding, I keep bringing up Jill today. Jill's my girlfriend who produces the podcast, who runs our digital marketing. We have 4 or 5 brands right now that we have that already are in existence or we're building, getting ready to push out. So she has endless amounts of work to do. Our customer service team and management team, endless amounts of work to do. It never really does actually stop. The list doesn't completely go away, but we have to stop or we will burn out. I literally had COVID symptoms about a month and a half ago because I was so loaded down with stress from all that we had going on in my life personally and professionally that it almost seemed like I had COVID. And fortunately I didn't, but we can truly overwork ourselves and stress ourselves out under the guise of, like you said, the grind or FOMO. And the reality is there will always be something else and someone else. And if we continue to run our business based on that versus setting intentional goals and the boundaries that you talked about, Christora, is so important. If we always go that way, we are going to burn ourselves out physically, mentally, emotionally, in our relationships. It's just not going to be a pretty picture. So I just love that recommendation. And the other thing you talked about to go along with that is establishing boundaries. We talked about it earlier, same thing again now. And it's a good reminder again, do it in our business for the sake of our mental health, for emotional health, for relationship health, and even actually for the health of our business. It's interesting how if we do create those boundaries and we limit the time that we're putting into business, that we're not working all hours of the day, that we then have the energy and the mental space and the clarity and the creativity to bring to it when we do actually go do that work. And that's something that gets missed too. Again, under the guise of putting the work in, grinding away, don't stop working, all this stuff. We actually, in a way, burn ourselves out creatively. And there's opportunity to be much better when we do go to work if we create boundaries. So these have been really great reminders. And I have to apologize again. I gave blood today, or I had blood drawn today for like a physical. And I don't know if it's that or I had too much caffeine or what, but I have to apologize for just going on rants in response to the things that you're saying. You brought some really interesting points of conversation up, and you also brought some really great
Thanks.
practical points of reference and advice for our listeners, not just for new photographers, but existing, photographers with existing businesses. These are really important talking points, and I appreciate you making time to share with all of us today. This has been
Thank you.
good.
I've really, really enjoyed being here. So
Well, and remind our listeners, if you will, and we can actually pop this up on screen, remind them what your Instagram is, especially for those that are only listening to audio, and
sure,
also
it's
your website.
green. Oh, so it's Green Apple Photo KY. You can find that's my Instagram. It's also my handle on TikTok. We do TikToks almost daily just to keep people informed and then also to add some more value. And then our website is greenappleweddings.co.co.
Perfect. Which, by the way, is just beautiful. Like you land on that page and these beautiful full screen images that are scrolling by. I mean, beautifully processed,
Thank
just
you.
really, really nice. So we'll link to this in the show notes, greenappleweddings.co. I've got that up on the screen there. And then Green Apple Photo KY. We'll put these in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. Thank you again, Christora, so much for making time for all of us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.